What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello and welcome back to another broadcast of Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and with me now, your other host, Eddie Connor.
Thanks, Tony, and hi, everybody. Now, Tony and I think that a lot of you would be fascinated about the stars and visiting the bright red planet we all know is Mars. Now, also, one of these days, we're hoping to be able to travel to Mars. And our guest tonight has interesting information he's sharing with you that Tony and I believe you will be wanting more.
Dr. John Brandenburg talks about new proof of a nuclear catastrophe on Mars. Eddie, are you intrigued?
I am. In an epic story of discovery, strong evidence is presented for a dead civilization on Mars and the shocking reason for its demise. It's an ancient planetary scale nuclear massacre, leaving isotopic traces of vast explosions that still endure to our present day.
Dr. Brandenburg has written Life and Death on Mars, which we'll be discussing today.
He is also a plasma physicist working as a consultant at Morningstar Applied Physics and is a part-time instructor of astronomy, physics, and mathematics at Madison College and other learning institutions in Madison, Wisconsin. We're very excited to welcome author and physicist Dr. John Brandenburg. Dr. John!
Dr. John!
Hey! Hey! Tony, Eddie, so great to be on your show. It's a great honor.
Well, we're excited to have you here because we've never had anybody like you on the show, meaning that to talk about Mars. Well, we've had a lot of subjects on this.
I'll take that as a great compliment.
That is.
It is.
It is. I think we've had over 300 and almost 400 shows now, and we've never really touched on the subject of actually a proof of a nuclear catastrophe on Mars. We've never talked about that before, so this is exciting.
Well, I would say, the evidence is very strong, and I showed this to scientists who can't be quoted publicly and who were experts on nuclear weapons, and they agreed with me. They said, yeah, Mars was nuked by somebody.
Well, okay.
The question is, did they do it to themselves, or did somebody else do it?
And when?
Yeah, and
There's
when.
no way to track when because of it's another planet.
Well,
it's pretty hard to do detective work.
Right. Well, John, before we get too far into that, a lot of people want to, they go, who is this guy? Who's this guy that wrote a book, and how did he even decide to get interested in this subject? So, can you go back a little bit before we talk about your books and figure out, what intrigued you to go on this path?
While all the other kids were out playing tag.
I'll tell you, actually, I kind of was born to be a scientist working on electromagnetism and plasmas. Plasmas are electromagnetic-fied gas, electrified gas, and I was kind of born for this. My parents told me that anything electrical just fascinated me, and they were so afraid I was going to get electrocuted when I was a little kid because I would keep horsing around with electrical stuff, even at 2 years old. And my uncle was a great physicist named William Seary, and he worked on the Manhattan Project during World War II.
Wow!
And so he was just a magnificent character. And when he would visit, I just kind of idolized him. And he was also a rather swashbuckling kind of Indiana Jones character. He went to Antarctica. He helped climb Mount Everest. He helped found the Sierra Club.
Wow!
And served as its president. So he was a very illustrious character and just a larger-than-life person. And he would spend long periods, discussing physics with me when, like I was 11 years old. and he would come up for a visit with my Aunt Jean, and I was kind of almost programmed from birth for this kind of scientific enterprise, and I had this figure who was kind of an Indiana Jones, brash, not afraid to go out and, climb a mountain himself or go to Antarctica, and these killer whales would keep coming up through the ice to try and get him because they thought they were penguins.
Oh, my Lord.
Killer whales had never seen people before, and they thought we were some kind of penguins and that they eat. And so it was, so I grew up in the shadow of this character, and he was my kind of inspiration. So I wanted, my big goal in life was to work on unified field theory, unifying gravity and electromagnetism with gravity. But the thing was, I wanted to do this so we could do space travel. I grew up during, when Star Trek was on TV,
right,
and we were going to the moon. So I really kind of associated space with all of this scientific, that the true scientist should be out there like some character in a science fiction movie, He's got a beautiful girlfriend, and he's young, dashing character sticking his neck out with these theories. It's kind of like that kind of character you see in science fiction movies
right,
from the 50s. So then I ended up going to college and majoring in physics, and managed to get into graduate school and study for my doctorate. And I was studying fusion energy, which is a cleaner, safer form of nuclear power. Unfortunately, it's hard to do. But anyway, I went to school to study that, graduate school, to study that at Lawrence Livermore National Lab. It's near San Francisco. And so it's outside the Bay Area hills, but it's out close to San Francisco and Berkeley and everything. And so I'm working there. At one end of the lab, we're trying to save humanity and stop global warming and everything by harnessing fusion power. At the other end of the lab, they're building hydrogen bombs.
Oh, God.
And I spent one period working on laser fusion, which is compressing small pellets to make little miniature hydrogen bombs. So I had to learn all of the physics of hydrogen bombs, and sat on the same hallway with people who were they developed a neutron bomb while I was there. That was I had the dubious honor of being there for the invention of the neutron bomb.
Whoa.
And let me tell you, these people would tell me without a hint of irony, they'd say, Brandenburg. People always call me Brandenburg because my name is John, and they just don't call me John. So anyway, they say, Brandenburg, the neutron bomb is wonderful because it only destroys the people, but it keeps all the valuable stuff, cars, factories, buildings, intact.
Okay.
They would tell me this. So anyway, so
that made it better.
So I got infused with nuclear weapon stuff kind of by osmosis, working at Livermore Lab on trying to save humanity. So then finally I'm out in the world, and I went from Livermore, which was like a college campus and a wonderful place to work, to India Labs in New Mexico, which was also a very good place to work, but it was a much more engineering. It was a fortress. It was a grim fortress in the desert compared to Livermore, which was like a little college campus, big college campus. And so I'm out there, and we were out there, and you've never gone through a international crisis till you're at a nuclear weapons lab.
Yeah.
Go through a crisis. Yeah. Because you have people walking around who are part of the national command for, command fire chain for nuclear weapons release, and they look like they are dying of stress during some of these crises. And so I was there when, we invaded Grenada and everything, and the Cold War was just grossly evident to me. It was very intense. And then, while I'm working there, the nuclear winter thing came out, and the nuclear winter came out. The nuclear winter studies came out. This was like November or December of 1983. MTV had just come on the air, and that's how I mark history. MTV. I love that, and when they actually used to play videos. And so anyway, as it turns out, the nuclear winter had been inspired by a big dust storm on Mars. We sent a probe to Mars called Mariner 9. It was the first probe that was going to go into orbit around Mars and take a lot of intensive photographic study at high resolution of the pictures, and they discovered the Marianas Canyon with the Mariner 9 and the Olympus Mons volcanoes and everything. But before they could do that, when they first arrived at Mars, the planet suddenly developed this dust storm, and the dust storm spread from North Pole to South Pole and covered the entire planet for like 4 months. And no one thought this was possible, that you could have a dust storm cover an entire planet like that. Normally, when on earthly weather, you have storm fronts that kind of move from place to place, or there's a hurricane, in some isolated spot. But on Mars, you could have a storm that could cover the entire planet, and this fascinated atmospheric scientists, and they discovered the same thing could happen on Earth if there was a nuclear war.
Oh.
And this meant that a nuclear war was no longer survivable, or you wouldn't want to be a survivor of a nuclear war.
No.
And this, by the way, this caused a wave of depression to pass through the people I was working with.
I'd say so.
And, I mean, my office mate, who was a really happy-go-lucky guy, just turns to me one day and says, "John, I used to think if there was a nuclear war starting, I was going to jump in my car, race home, get the kids and wife and kids, and we're going to head for the hills." He said, "Now after this nuclear winter thing, I'm just going to get up on the rooftop with a six-pack of beer and watch the whole thing go."
Well, I've always said if a nuclear war happens, I hope I'm in the city it hits, because I don't want to survive.
Oh, that was my attitude too. I just said, well, I'm at ground zero, and that's just fine. And so I didn't know what to say, so I finally said to his name was Malcolm. I said, "Malcolm, what kind of beer would you be drinking?"
That's always good to know.
So he laughed, but several people told me the same thing, that they had thought that as scientists that they understood the secret flame and it couldn't burn them, and now they knew they were doomed, and so were their families, because more people would die of cold and of starvation after a nuclear war than would die in the initial explosions and fallout. And so that was the stage was set for me after this happened in November and early December, and it was done by Carl Sagan. And so then I had Christmas vacation, and I'm watching TV with my little daughter and then wife, and these two guys, it's an evening magazine, and they showed this thing about this face on Mars.
I remember.
And they showed they had two pictures of it, and they had all sorts of they had electronic enhancements of it. They'd gotten the original data tapes, they'd enhanced them, they were false color, and I was just completely stunned. And I thought, oh my God, maybe we're saved, because I was intensely worried that the Cold War, Reagan had assumed power, and he was very confrontational with the Russians, and you just got the feeling that this is a Mexican standoff with everybody's got their guns out, pointed at each other, and all it's going to take is one firecracker going off someplace, and everyone's going to start shooting. But I saw this on TV, and I thought, perhaps this discovery has happened just for this time, because this will end the Cold War. I thought to myself, if we discover a dead civilization on Mars, it'll be so distracting, it will actually end the Cold War. It'll turn the human race from this Mexican standoff. Yeah. Everyone will holster their guns and basically ride up to Mars, hopefully together, to find out what this is all about. And it would turn the human race eyes outward into the stars rather than concentrating on Earth and, should Marx or Jefferson be taught in schools, et cetera. So I thought I wanted very much to do something to try and end the Cold War stalemate and this dangerous kind of two scorpions in a bottle situation we were in with the Soviet Union that I felt very intensely because I was on the front lines of it there at Sandia. And so as soon as Christmas break ended, I called, I scribbled down the names of these guys, DePietro and Molinar, at Goddard Space Center, and I got a hold of them. And they sent me books that they had published. They had made pamphlets. And they had not only found two pictures of face, where there was only supposed to be one picture, but they found a second picture that the government had apparently taken a month later after when no one was looking. Mm-hmm. And they found a pyramid.
I wrote down
five-sided pyramid about 10 kilometers from the face. And you just looked at these pictures they had. Here's the face. Here's right next to it a five-sided pyramid. And it was just overwhelming. I just thought, So to make a long story short, what happened was Dick Hoagland, bless his heart, rounded up a bunch of scientists and engineers and got us all to verify and, further investigate what DePietro and Molinar found. And as a result, we ended up 6 months later charging out to what's called the Case for Mars conference in Colorado, and presented a paper on what we had found, that we had verified DePietro and Molinar's work as being, they'd done everything right, and they documented it very well, and we got the tapes, and Silicon Valley was just getting going there, and they had people who ran the tapes and got their own pictures and said, yes, this is what the pictures show, that DePietro and Molinar haven't done anything funny with the data. And what's also interesting is SRI was kind of the headquarters, Stanford Research Institute, and that was the place where they were doing what was called remote viewing, which nobody knew about at the time. Mm-hmm. So right next door to the Mars investigation, they were doing remote viewing investigations, and we found out later that they then turned their attentions to Mars. So all of this stuff happened in about 6 months, and in the process of doing this, I'm a trained scientist, so I naturally was reading all of the scientific articles I could find about Mars. And I was standing in line. In those days, we had to use Xerox machines for everything. So I'm standing there with this book trying to copy a bunch of articles from this book about the Viking expedition. And I'm at Sandia Labs, where they do a lot of intelligence work for the government, particularly air sampling. They sample the air atmosphere on Earth. They sample the isotopes in the air to see what people are doing as far as how many nuclear reactors are running, because they make an exhaust, and how much plutonium people are making, because that makes a peculiar isotopes in the air. And if somebody sets off a bomb and doesn't tell anyone, they can tell because certain isotopes appear in the atmosphere. So I'm standing in line, and this character is standing next to me, and he notices my book on Mars, and he's a very friendly sort of character, and he's interested in my book on Mars, and so I showed him, and I said, gee, it's really weird, the Martian atmosphere has really strange nuclear isotopes in it. And he says, oh, it does? And I showed it to him, and it was the Mars atmosphere has this rare gas called xenon in it, just like Earth. Only on Mars, it's dominated by one isotope called xenon-129. On Earth, xenon-129 and 132, those are two different isotopes, are just about balanced. And so is that's sort of the rest of the solar system. The rocks we brought back from the moon and meteorites, and they all show this balance between 132 and 129. But on Mars, there's 2.5 times more 129 than there is 132. And this guy looks at it, and he looks up at me, and his smile is gone. He says, somebody nuked them.
Whoa.
And I said, what? He says, somebody nuked them. And he shut the book and handed it back to me, and he said, excuse me. And I knew that reaction is every once we were in an unclassified area, and he realized he'd said something that was classified or vaguely classified, and he decided to excuse himself and go back into the classified area. The library was unclassified, and but the rest of the building was, you could have classified discussions, but we were in an unclassified area, so I got this deep chill, and went home, and my wife could see that it was like I'd seen a ghost, she said, and I said, oh, I just had a kind of rough day. Everything's fine, I said, and I didn't tell her about it, but I called up one of the people at SRI and confided in him, what this guy had said, and the guy from SRI's response was, oh my God, because we all remarked on, Mars has a lot of craters,
mm-hmm.
and so, you just think, well, it's like the moon, but the crater, like the pyramid has a crater on it, and you think, well, what is the chances of something hitting this one small area? Like that's almost as if somebody was targeting it.
Wow.
And so it looked like a war zone, and so we decided, the other scientists and I decided to just kind of keep quiet about it. I don't know who else he told, but suddenly we knew that not only was Mars a dead planet with a dead civilization on it, but it might be a big a crime scene. That somebody may have, that it may have been the site of a nuclear war among its inhabitants, or something else. We didn't know what. And I, unfortunately, at the time, well, or fortunately, I didn't know enough about these particular things, these details of nuclear weapons signatures, to really know whether. I didn't understand why the guy had said this. I just knew it had something to do with the xenon 129 because that was the graph he looked at when he finally looked up at me and said somebody nuked them. So what happened then was we continued to investigate, and we found another site on Mars where there was a face, like the first face in Cydonia.
Another one.
It had matching details. It had marks on the cheeks and an indentation over the left eye that were the same, and it was a face. And it was a place we called it Utopia. And what was funny was in the middle of all of this, Carl Sagan called me up in my office at Sandia Labs and basically said, "What are you causing this trouble on Mars for?" He said, we're trying to get more Mars money, and you're creating controversy, and we wish you'd stop.
Was it that nice though?
Yeah, it was like, please leave Mars to the adults, you know. And so he actually it was very pleasant talking to him. And what had happened is we'd gone to this Colorado conference and presented our papers, and we got a very positive response from everybody. People said, "Wow, this is really something." And one of the scientists came down to Sandia to give a talk, and I joined him for lunch, and he said, "We really liked your presentation." He said, "We didn't know what to think about your pictures, but you proposed that there was this ocean on Mars, because it looked like there was an ocean, that Cydonia on Mars, where the face and the pyramid are looked like they were shore of an ancient ocean." So he said, "We really liked your ocean. Why don't you give a paper just on that subject someplace?" So I said, "Well, I certainly would try." And then I showed him the pictures from Utopia of the matching faces with the Cydonia site, and he just was mesmerized. And I gave him the pictures. And so shortly after that, I got another phone call from Carl Sagan.
You started to become popular.
Yeah, well, it was really good for my morale because, I was a little bit embarrassed. I had prided myself on trying to be a good young scientist and doing everything respectable and I'm starting out as a scientist with my career, and I don't want to make any missteps. And I knew that getting involved in this Mars thing was kind of risky. In fact, the reason I did it was I felt that to pass up an opportunity to kind of end the Cold War would just be unforgivable. If if suddenly we had the Cold War blossomed into a nuclear war a couple of years later, and I thought to myself, well, if I'd only not worried about my scientific reputation and done something about this Mars thing, maybe we could have prevented this. And so instead, I kind of following my uncle, the swashbuckling scientist's lead, I charged into it. And and I have to hand it to Dick Hoagland. He's just a brilliant promoter, and he made that face more recognizable on Earth than the George Washington on the dollar bill. Suddenly, that face was everywhere, and he was a journalist, not a scientist. So there were certain frictions between him and the rest of us scientists, finally, and we all, we kind of gave the paper at Colorado, and then we sort of declared the investigation over. We'd kind of done our jobs, and so I ended up moving to, I left Sandia Labs and went to Washington, D.C. to be part of the Reagan Star Wars program, which was a space program.
Ooh.
Oh, yes. Ooh, space, the final frontier. And, I talked to one scientist. It was Brian O'Leary. And he was very depressed, he said, because, the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, or the Star Wars Defense Program, was militarizing space. And I said, well, Brian, it's still space, Just keep your mouth shut and earn your gold. That's what I told. That's a line from a movie, by the way, called Lancelot or something like that. Anyway, so I was just really thrilled to be working in space. In fact, they called me space cadet at work. I worked at a defense contractor place, and they were, involved in all sorts of scientific work supporting the Defense Department, and here I was I was the only guy specializing in space, so they called me Space Cadet. But I liked it. And so we basically kept agitating and going to conferences, and also DePietro lived in Washington D.C. area, so he and I would work together, and what we became specialists in was showing up for champagne receptions they had down at the Air and Space Museum, Washington D.C. for NASA. Anytime NASA would do some big mission or something like that, they'd have these wine and cheese receptions down at the Air and Space Museum. So we would just show up there, and we basically would work the crowd.
Wow, smart.
And we talked to senators, and I even talked to the head of NASA at one point.
Wow.
And we talked about Mars. We said, we should really be going after Mars. We didn't go into all the details as to why, but we said Mars. That's the money shot. Let's go there. And so we quietly, and the other thing was they wanted to send another probe to Mars called Mars Observer, and they specified that it wasn't going to carry a camera.
Oh.
So we would work the crowds at these wine and cheese things and say, you really got to have a camera on that thing.
It wouldn't
Going
make
to
sense.
Mars, bringing a camera, that's just not right.
No.
And so we kind of got so that working as a team and consuming a great deal of wine it's sort of really good
And
wine
cheese.
and champagne at these
And cheese,
things.
yeah.
And talking to a lot of lovely women involved in the space community at the same time. I'd become divorced by this time.
So he was having a good time.
You were.
That's another story. But anyway, we lobbied quietly for them to send put a camera on this space probe so that they could rephotograph the face and the pyramid. And lo and behold, they decided they were going to put a camera on there, and partly because we created so much fuss over the face
Good.
that the NASA people were saying, we're going to show you, we're going to take a new picture and show you that it's nothing. And so in the meantime, I had, then I switched the Cold War ended suddenly. And so I ended up still working in space, and I got to be part of a mission to the moon called Clementine. And, that's a whole program in itself. I don't want to go into all the details of that. But we were getting ready to launch this probe to the moon, and the Mars Observer was, of course, by this time headed for Mars with this nice shiny camera on it, a super camera. And you know what happened. It was supposed to enter into orbit around Mars and just disappeared.
Oh, Lord.
Ooh,
yes.
After and a kind of hilarious sideshow to this was that not Carl Sagan, but this guy named Mike Malin, who had built the camera, and he was very vociferously saying that the face on Mars is nothing, it's just a funny-shaped hill, and we're going to show you by taking pictures with my fancy new camera.
Mm-hmm.
And so him and Hoagland were exchanging broadside the internet, which was just getting going at the time, and so there was all of this verbal jousting going on, and then so the big moment arrives, and the spacecraft is supposed to go into orbit around Mars, and it just disappears. And suddenly, let me tell you something. Mars became the most important piece of real estate in the solar system when that happened.
Absolutely.
In Washington, D.C., I will tell you, I was working with a bunch of Defense Department space people. They treated this as if somebody had torpedoed a U.S. destroyer in the Persian Gulf.
Mm-hmm.
They treated this as if this was an absolute crisis. And the head of NASA actually called up the team that had assembled the Clementine probe for the moon and said, could you send a copy of the same probe to Mars to replace the Mars observer. And we said, well, let's think about it. And then we said, yes, of course we will. And so then this set off this political firestorm. We didn't realize that Mars was owned by JPL.
What? Owned?
Yes, it was owned by JPL. It was their territory, and we were going to send our filthy little probe to there. Oh.
No way.
How can somebody own Mars?
Same reason the banks
we didn't know anyone owned Mars. There weren't any signs. I mean, imagine 50 adult scientists working on this program to send this probe to the moon, and it's a perfectly good probe. It's got a lot of cameras on it and stuff like this. And then we're told to plan for a mission to the Mars. We're asked by Golden, who's head of NASA, for heaven's sakes, to do this. And so we start doing it, and then a package arrived in the mail, and it was one of our cameras stuck in the belly of a fish.
Whoa.
Are you kidding me?
Now this is getting good. Now.
I'm embellishing the story.
Yeah,
I'm part Irish.
But that makes
so
it...
I'm a wee bit Irish. So basically, JPL called us up and said, you better think twice about going to Mars with your probe. If you knew what was good for you, you wouldn't take this mission.
Well, John, hold that thought for just one second.
If you're just tuning in to the show, you're listening to Truth Be Told with
Wow.
Tony and Eddie, where we believe in experience becomes truth. I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Tony Sweet.
And we have with us Dr. John Brandenburg. He's written the book Life and Death on Mars, which is about the new Mars synthesis, and also Dead Mars, Dying Earth.
It's Death on Mars. Death on Mars.
Death on Mars. Okay. Oh, Death on Mars.
Right. Instead of Life on Mars, Death on Mars.
Okay.
I know, Tony, Eddie. Just humor me here.
No, you're fabulous. So now you find out that JPL is invested, obviously.
Oh my God!
And then
it was like we blunder into this
mafia
barbed wire fence charged to 1,000 volts around Mars. That was not there. We couldn't see it until we got close, and so this got really crazy.
Yeah.
And and we also found out that just because Dan Golden is head of NASA and gives an order doesn't mean JPL is going to follow it.
Why is everything so flippin' political and driven by greed?
God, they had pissed on. They had marked their territory on Mars. They basically had peed on it and said it's ours. You can't go anywhere close. No one except Jet Propulsion Lab can send probes to Mars.
I mean, so what happens if another country ends up sending something up there? They're just going to shoot that down too?
Well, you notice, the Europeans finally succeeded in putting a probe going around Mars.
Yes.
So you can orbit Mars, but like anyone who's tried to land a rover, you notice how they all crash?
Right.
Yes.
There's nothing suspicious. Of course, there's nothing suspicious about that.
Of course not. So,
of course not.
Speaking of nothing,
these are just internet trolls have been spreading these vile rumors.
Yeah.
So anyway, we find out that Mars is marked territory for Jet Propulsion Lab, and we can't go close to it. And we had two big political battles. I mean, these were going up to Capitol Hill and lobbying and, counting votes. And the local congressman said the big deal was the space station.
Yeah.
And he said he was against the space. The space station had survived by one vote in Congress the year before, and now it was up for re-upping. To renew its the bill. Mm-hmm. They were funding the space station construction year by year, and so it was up for a vote again, and the congressman whose district we were flying our mission to the moon out of came and visited our mission, and we talked about the Mars mission, and he was all excited. He says, "I'll flip my vote on the space station if you guys get permission to go to Mars." So this started a big fight on Capitol Hill, and and he called Golden, and he negotiated this that he would flip his vote on the space station, so the space station would win by 2 votes instead of one.
Wow.
I'd never seen any of this happen before. I was a completely naive character as to how space programs are actually funded. Capitol Hill, and then the Planetary Society with Carl Sagan got involved.
Ooh.
And they went around talking trash about our spacecraft, how it was no good, and it would crash on Mars and destroy Mars.
Wow.
And anyway, so this all became apparent to me that Mars was surrounded by hidden force fields. That there was far more going on at Mars than was being publicly acknowledged, and this, of course, reinforced my feeling. Well, of course, if there's a dead civilization on Mars, that is a closely guarded kind of national treasure, and you only let certain people handle that who, like Jet Propulsion Lab, they're kind of on board, they're in the loop, they're reliable, we're going to let them handle this, and nobody else. And so you got the feeling that this was, that Mars was, in a sense, a classified program. And it was so secret they weren't even telling anybody about it. It wasn't like, you can't go to Mars because it's classified. No, they weren't saying that. They were just saying, you can't go to Mars, and we don't have to tell you why.
So, yeah, but meanwhile, what, with all of you being a scientist and all of that, and all of your friends who are and who know what they know, what is the general hypothesis? Meaning, what are they hiding other than... What is it? Why are they scared?
Technology?
Yeah, is it technology? Is it they already have a group of people up there with... who was it, Matt Damon?
Matt Damon playing potatoes and stuff?
Yeah.
I think just the fact that there's a dead civilization up there, or that's certainly what it looks... I've looked at all the pictures.
Right.
And so does everybody else. And it's just obvious that's what we're looking at. And... So I think that is the secret. And you got to remember, the U.S. government is very sensitive about extraterrestrial stuff.
True.
Intelligence. I wrote a novel called Morning Star Pass: The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up, which suggested the real backstory. It was science fiction, but the real backstory to all of this was that there was a UFO cover-up, and that's why Mars. They didn't want to talk about Mars because the Mars bone was connected to the UFO bone, basically. And that once you find a dead civilization on Mars, then the beans are spilled.
Right.
You're not alone in the universe anymore, and then people start asking about these funny lights in the sky, etc. So I think it was at the time that the finding a dead civilization on Mars was viewed as undermining the UFO cover-up. But I'm just speculating. As I said, I since the whole thing was so far removed from anything I knew anything about, I wrote a science fiction novel about it. Of course, 2 beautiful women want to be taken seriously as journalists. They're like, they're like working at. It's a blonde and an Asian, and they're both working at this news network like CNN. and they're both pretty faces reading the news, and they want to be taken seriously as journalists. So then somebody leaks all these classified documents to them about the UFO cover-up, and the head of the UFO cover-up hears that there's this security leak, and he watches them talking about it on the news. He says, nobody's going to pay any attention to those two bimbos. And 6 months later, he's dead, and his entire, secret empire is completely destroyed. And anyway, so it's a great book, and people really liked it. I've written a sequel now. You can get it on Kindle now, by the way.
Oh, good.
Morning Star Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover-Up. I wrote it under a pen name, Victor Norgard. I wrote it under a pen name because I wanted to talk about UFOs, but being a scientist,
Yep.
Yeah.
how can you talk? I mean, on Mars, we have all of the scientific data. We have isotope ratios. We have pictures. We have, Geiger counter readings, etc. We have meteorites from Mars. We can handle it. A friend of mine was a UFO editor of a UFO magazine, and I complained to him. I said, Don, the problem with UFO, ufology is there are no facts. They're just reports.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there are facts somewhere. They're just not for public consumption.
The facts are behind triple razor wire that carries from 1,000 volts out at Site 51 or something like that.
Yes.
So anyway, I just treated it as science fiction, and people really liked it, and so I would speculate that the government was so allergic, so carefully guarded the stuff on Mars because they felt that finding a dead civilization on Mars, even a dead primitive-looking civilization like we found, the civilization looks primitive. It doesn't look, based on an earthly, the only reference point we have is stuff on Earth. The civilization, the relics of the civilization look like they're from a Bronze Age or like the Mayan, early Bronze Age Mayan or Aztec or early Egyptian civilizations.
Well, I love metaphysics and spirituality, and I'm a lover of the paranormal and intuitive. And since the first day I came out of the closet as an intuitive and a seeker of information like that, and I've seen UFOs. I have had experiences that connected to other multidimensional beings. I know. And what they have said since for over 25 years is that once Mars, this is their hypothesis, this is their theory rather, that Mars was like Earth. It was as fruitful and it was abundant and wealthy as Earth, and that we had humans live there until we destroyed it.
Like we're destroying
Earth right now. Yeah.
We're setting bad precedents here.
I know.
No, but Eddie, you're right. I mean, you can the first mention of a face on Mars was in a science fiction comic book in 1958.
Yep.
Well,
it was by Kirby Comics. It was the people who later became Marvel and did the Fantastic Four, the same artists and stuff.
Yep.
And they have this discovery of this giant carved face on Mars, and the pictures look just like the pictures they took, and it was in 1958.
Well, Eddie and I...
There's this psychic, intuitive feeling that Mars was once inhabited. It was once like Earth.
I believe it.
Yeah. Oh, I do too. I really do.
So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know if do you know Laura?
What's that?
Do you know Laura Eisenhower?
I've heard her name, but I don't think I've ever met her.
Well, we've interviewed her a couple of times. She's the great granddaughter of President Eisenhower, and she said that actually they've been doing Mars trips even during her great grandfather's rain.
Yeah.
They said they've been on Mars for a long time.
Well, I guess if you captured if you had a breakthrough, you invented anti-gravity, which they're now basically have a public project at NASA, at NASA Johnson, that's called EM Drive. It's anti-gravity.
Wow.
Basically. And it works.
Wow.
It works. And you can kind of say, well, maybe they've had this for a long time, and now they're kind of letting this out, kind of in drip here and drip there. We call this the dance of the seven veils, where the government, slowly reveals.
Yeah, well, they need to change the name to
knows.
the dance of
What's
the
that?
seven. They need to change the name to the dance of the seven hells because they think we're so stupid.
Oh, I know.
But what we love about you is, and we have like 2 minutes left because you're one of those.
You're passionate.
Okay.
That's how passionate
You need to come
are.
back. You have to come back.
But you're.
Oh, well, thank you, Tony, Eddie.
Yeah.
It's really been fun talking to you guys, and let's have me back. By the way, I work on unified field theory, and I gave a paper also on explaining the EM drive. We now have gravity E&M unification, basically.
What does that mean, real quick? Because
it means that we can modify gravity fields directly with electromagnetism now.
Wow.
Without getting
It
shot.
means we can go to Mars without rocket fuel. We just need electric power.
I'm just going to say this just for fun. It's almost, I believe that souls are non-physical, they're invisible, they're eternal. And I feel like souls come into human forms and they reincarnate. I believe in past lives. You, to me, I feel like your last lifetime was in like 2150 AD. And then you were so hooked into like all of that, and you were born in this lifetime. You just felt like you were like Rebecca Boone back in the pioneer day. You're like, this is a socket. We need to do something to stop the gravitational pull.
Thank you very much.
You've got that kind of energy about you. So we love it when we have a passionate person on board who is as your enthusiasm is contagious, to say the least. But we do want to have you back, and we love everything that you're sharing.
Thank you guys very much. It's a great honor to be on your show, and I've enjoyed it. And yes, let's talk again next time. We can talk about the big breakthrough on anti-gravity.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
After the Chinese, apparently the Chinese took a version of this up on their space station. And it motored around inside their space station without any propellers or jets or anything, and proved it. It works.
There you go.
Well, you're listening to Dr. John Brandenburg. Go to lifeonmars.pub. That's for publish.
Yes.
Check out his website. Any other places people can find you? Twitter or anything like that? I guess
people have advised me it would be dangerous for me to be tweeting a lot.
Yeah. Well, you need to listen to them.
I would speak my mind, and my mind is sometimes disconnected from reality.
Yeah.
And so I tend to. The best thing to do is read the book Death on Mars. It's on Amazon.com, and you can also check out my science fiction under the pen name Victor Norgard. I've published two science fiction novels, and about space and space and politics.
That's what it's about. I know where people will be finding you this weekend at that new Amy Adams movie.
Oh, absolutely! Me and my buddies we're going to go charge out there.
Yeah,
we actually have
one couple, and I always go see these new movies.
Awesome.
And so this will be great fun.
Awesome. You've been a pleasure, John.
You have been a
Thank you
pleasure.
so much.
Thank you very, very much for being on the show.
You guys carry on and keep spreading the word, and good things are going to happen.
I think so
too.
They're big scientific advances, and they'll be good. Their effect on the human race will be good.
We love it. We need that, John.
Let's all be hopeful for the future.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr. Brandenburg.
Okay. Anyway, Tony, Eddie, I guess I better sign off. So.
We got to sign off too.
Thank
The
you
next
so
show's
much,
coming up.
and for having me on your show. Let's do this again.
You got it. All right.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, that's what I love.
Well, you know, it's funny 'cause when you say scientist, you immediately going to say they're going to be boring and they're going to, I mean, this guy.
I never thought that.
Well, no, I didn't think that. But, you know, there's people think that a scientist, you're going to throw out these terminology that
we won't be able to keep up with
Yes.
their intellect.
But this gentleman, he definitely shows his enthusiasm and his experience, and he makes it fun for people to learn.
Yeah, and you can tell he's got a good sense of humor.
Oh,
And he had
right.
a great uncle, man. What a great uncle.
Oh, my God. That's talk about
visiting the
inspiration.
Antarctica.
Yeah.
And like hanging out. But, I mean, he does. He feels like he was born in the wrong century, that he had been born in a couple of centuries way past this one, the George and Judy Jetson
Right.
century. And he got transferred back to, I don't know, maybe we can have electric cars now.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, actually, you know there were electric cars before gas cars. Did you know
Yes,
that?
I knew that.
And then they
Yes.
scrapped them and
Yeah, I wonder
Yeah.
who did that.
I don't know. Well, on that note, we want to thank you guys for tuning in on this show. We hope you learned something. We hope that you guys enjoyed it. And we always love to hear from you guys. Let us know if you want to have somebody on the show. We're actually looking for ideas because we interview so many people and so many subjects. We don't want to run out of subjects because there's people out there all over the world that have information that can enhance all of our lives.
Yeah.
And we want to hear from you because I've had people tell me about somebody Aboriginal, I think an Aboriginal leader in Australia that they want to have on our show. So
Awesome.
I would love to talk about that.
Absolutely.
So, but anyway, I'm Tony Sweet,
I'm Eddie Connor.
and this is Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie on Universal Broadcasting Network. Until then, have a good one.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for listening to Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie right here on ubnradio.com, Channel 1. Make sure you go to the iTunes channel and subscribe there to the show. Listen to us on iHeartRadio, and don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel, which is Truth Be Told. That's the Truth Be Told page on the YouTube channel. Check us out there. We've got lots of videos, lots of podcasts, and lots of things where we're probably acting silly. So every Friday, 4 p.m. Pacific time, right here on ubnradio.com. Check Tony and I out on Truth Be Told with Tony and Eddie.